online shopping or gaming. The bill still needs to pass a Senate vote, but leaders there have expressed support for the idea.
And a dramatic rescue in Northern California caught on video.
The California Highway Patrol says a woman was stranded for 15 hours overnight on top of her overturned car.
She tried driving through a swollen creek following heavy rains, but underestimated how deep it was. Eventually, a camper in the area saw the car and called for help.
Helicopter rescuers from the local fire department airlifted her out of the creek. She was then transported to a local hospital with minor injuries.
And in transportation news, a congestion fee possibly coming to commuters traveling from New Jersey into New York City soon.
Yes, New York is poised to roll out its Central Business District tolling program.
We all know traffic in the city can be pretty unforgiving at times, but some economists, like a professor at George Mason University, are saying this congestion fee doesn't make sense.
That's because he says as the city recovers from the pandemic, it would want more crowding on the streets, not less. I went out to investigate and spoke to a different professor in an urban management department for some insight on this. Take a look. I'm under the Hudson River traveling eastbound in the Lincoln Tunnel from New Jersey to New York City. Right now, there's already a hefty toll to do this. But if the New York MTA's congestion pricing plan that has preliminary approval actually goes through, you'll have to pay an extra $15 to go through this tunnel or the Holland Tunnel into Manhattan. Let's find out if this fee is necessary.
Soon disappear. You know how it is now? If you go and ask outside, there are many blacksmiths, but in reality, it is a disappearing craft. If someone has a welding machine or a grinder, they start creating something like blacksmiths do, and they call themselves blacksmiths. But pure blacksmithing might disappear soon. Everybody prefers working with easy machines now, and they forget about the old ways, and that is it.
UNESCO seems to feel the same way. Last month, the agency formally recognized the craft and inscribed it on the Intangible Cultural Heritage List.
Geomery itself became an area of artistic blacksmithing, not just a place of preservation of blacksmithing traditions, but an area of artistic blacksmithing. Their creations have become an important part of the city's architectural identity.
One Armenian cultural anthropologist says UNESCO's designation will encourage the city's blacksmiths to find new apprentices.
The registration for the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List has increased the responsibility of the masters of Geomri's blacksmithing tradition. They must preserve the craft and pass it on, create new students, and the craft must be continued in the city.
As for Popoyan, he hopes to keep the tradition alive by teaching his nephew.
I'm glad UNESCO recognizes this. I really enjoy artisanship like that. And the quality back then, if you make it by hand, is so much better. It's much durable, right?
Yeah, you got to preserve that art form. And, you know, that's just a rugged guy over there. He's smashing that metal with those sparks flying, no safety glasses.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you noticed. Oh, yeah. All right. We'll head into a quick 30-second break, but we will be right back, so stay tuned.
NTD News. Republicans delivered a double-digit victory to Trump in New Hampshire, but primary voters overall sent warning signs for his standing in a fall election. Haley won big among college graduates and independents, and 42% of voters said Trump would not be fit for the presidency if convicted of a crime. But loyalty among hardcore Republicans and Trump's swift coalescing of party leaders has powered a rebound for the history books.
The reason we have support is because they are so bad at what they're doing and so evil, and they're destroying our country.
And meanwhile, CNN's exit poll shows young Republicans made up Trump's strongest age group in Tuesday's primary.
60% of voters aged 18 to 29 voted for Trump, a sign that the former president is expanding his voter base in areas where he previously lacked. And now we get some analysis on the New Hampshire Democratic primary results with Robert Patillo, a Democrat strategist and civil rights attorney. Robert, thank you so much for getting up early and talking to us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Should Biden be pleased or concerned with the results in New Hampshire's Democratic primary, considering he is apparently falling short of that 80% threshold that both former presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama crossed?
Well, New Hampshire is an interesting situation because the Democratic Party decided to move its nominating process to begin in South Carolina this year. That's because South Carolina represents a new demographic for the party, where you're being more diverse, more African American, more minorities, more women. And in protest, the New Hampshire decided to go ahead with their primary. Joe Biden's only write-in candidate. His name's not on the ballot in New Hampshire. And that's why we're seeing his numbers lagging behind some of his predecessors. But he still won with 60% of the vote, even as the write-in candidate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the U.S. representatives from New Hampshire, she was saying that write-ins are pretty difficult to do, and she pointed to Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski's election in which she got 39% of the vote, which was the most in write-in history. So Biden pulling in about 56% of the vote could be seen as pretty good here. Is it likely that a large number of Democrat voters in the Granite State switched over to the GOP primary in order to vote for Haley and protest to Trump?
I think we saw some of that, but I don't think that was in large numbers. I think what we saw for Haley was very much that protest vote against Trump. There's really the Republican Party coalesced into the MAGA Party starting in 2008 with the defeat of John McCain. We saw the rise of the Tea Party in 2012. Then the rise of Trump in 2016. I think this marks the wholesale takeover of the Republican Party by the MAGA movement. Now there are MAGAs, and then there are very few rhinos left. And that has to be the reality for the Republican Party going forward, understanding that this is the policy, this is the agenda. The America First agenda is the Republican agenda, and there's no more running away from it, no more hiding from it, and that's what Joe Biden is attempting to exploit in this campaign.
Okay, so Robert, did Biden emerge from New Hampshire in rather good position for the general election, or is there work to be done to make his case to voters?
I think there's absolutely work to be done. You look at the poll numbers from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that they're underwater, under 40% in many polls. Many young people, many African Americans are very upset with the Biden administration for not delivering on some of their promises from the 2020 campaign. Of course, Palestine remains a huge issue among young folks.
Politics. Palmetto State primaries from today.
We'll head out to South Carolina, where I think we're going to win easily.
Nikki Haley, fresh off another decisive loss to former President Donald Trump, looking to voters in the state that elected her governor twice to keep her in this race. But voters here, over and over again, told us they've already made their choice.
Donald Trump, 200%.
I'll be voting for Donald Trump.
Support for Trump remains strong with Republicans in South Carolina, despite his legal troubles and the fact it's now a one-on-one race with their former governor.
I just think that Trump is a stronger presidential figure than she is.
I think she should drop out, apologize to President Trump, and join forces so we can try to save this country.
Voters frequently citing Trump's long list of high-profile South Carolina endorsements.
This election is over.
None more than Senator Tim Scott, who was appointed by Haley in 2012.
I think there's going to be a surprise where I think Trump's going to landslide it. Yeah, I do. With Tim Scott backing him, I do.
But not everyone is ready to forfeit the race. Stephanie Bennett says she's technically undecided, but likes Haley.
Her track record as the governor here, and then what she did in the United Nations.
And she's worried in a month her vote won't matter.
I wonder if people aren't going to go into it with a preconceived notion of he's already won. You know, that is a fear. Like, get out and vote. Don't think he's already won, because I don't think he has.
Former President Trump can stay on the ballot in Maine at least until the Supreme Court makes a decision on his eligibility.
Maine's highest court yesterday rejected an appeal from Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, asking the court to review her decision to remove Trump from the ballot.
Bellows had argued delaying the decision could cause confusion for voters during the state's primary, which is coming up on March 5th.
If the Supreme Court decision comes after that, voters could cast ballots for Trump that wouldn't end up being tallied.
However, Maine's highest court said they would only add to the confusion by ruling before the Supreme Court.
Bellows removed Trump from the ballot last year, citing the 14th Amendment, which bars any public official previously engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding office. Trump is facing similar challenges in over 30 states.
A former President Donald Trump trade advisor is expected to be sentenced today.
Peter Navarro was convicted last year for not complying with a 2022 subpoena.
It was issued by the former House Select Committee that investigated the January 6th Capitol breach.
Last week, a judge denied his request to redo the trial. Navarro's had argued may have been influenced by protesters when they took a break during deliberations before announcing the verdict. They claimed it was grounds for a mistrial.
Federal prosecutors want a 6-month prison sentence for Navarro.
His attorneys, however, are asking for a sentence of no more than 6 months probation and a $200 fine.
Coming up, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu facing pressure from all sides as the fight against Hamas continues. We speak to a former advisor to the U.S. ambassador to Israel for his take on the latest developments.
Allegations of anti-Semitism on campus. A House committee is seeking answers from the University of Pennsylvania. The school was recently ranked the worst category of anti-Semitic hostility in a study. Find out more.
Boeing 737
were shot down and that a third had impacted nearby.
Mayorsk said nearby explosions forced 2 ships from its U.S. subsidiary to turn around. The logistics company says the ships were carrying U.S. military supplies. The company says it's suspending Red Sea transits by its U.S.-flagged vessels. There were no injuries or damage reported.
Central Command says 2 more Houthi ready-to-launch missiles were destroyed in strikes yesterday. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says the U.S. is acting in self-defense. He called the Houthi attacks that they are unpredictable and amateur. Kirby stated U.S. strikes will continue as long as the Houthis continue their attacks.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing pressure from all sides as the war Hamas builds. To shed some challenge, we spoke Lightstone to the Israel.
Parliamentary democracies are messy. At any point in time, there could be a no confidence vote, and certainly after the tragedy of October 7th, there will call. Really, likely forever. When that call happens is unclear. I think the country is fairly united right now. It used to be 98%. It's probably in the high 80s today in terms of being able to complete the job, eradicate Hamas's ability to attack Israel again, and that's without even addressing the challenge of the North. Today, Israel has over 200,000 citizens that are not in their homes. I believe until the security situation is resolved, nobody really wants to talk politics. Again, politicians will talk, but I think the people of Israel are the security situation resolved before to the polls.
So let's talk about also the exit strategy in the day after the war. What do you think will Gaza look like medium to long term?
Well, here's sort of the issue. The concept of what happens the day after the war wasn't addressed with the United States of America and our allies in the process of World War II. Right? There wasn't a concern in the process of Vietnam what happens the day after. Israel was attacked, breaking a ceasefire. Hamas broke a ceasefire on October 7th in the morning, the worst single day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Israel's first issue is to go ahead and make sure that something like that can never happen again. After that happens, there's an enormous opportunity for the rest of the world who's screaming and clamoring for Palestinian rights and Palestinian civilians to be able to step forth and present a new way forward. What is very clear is that the old way doesn't work. It can't be under the influence of people who want to encourage and finance and grow terrorism, and it can't be under the thumb of actual terrorists. Until there's a solution for what that looks like, I think all options are on the table. Unfortunately, none of them are great options today.
Thank you very much, Ariel Lightstone. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Turning now to allegations of anti-Semitism on college campuses. Lawmakers want answers. As part of an investigation, a House committee sent a letter to the University of Pennsylvania yesterday demanding the school turn over documents related to anti-Semitic incidents. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the probe.
Today, Representative Virginia Fox, the chairwoman of the Republican-led House Education Committee, is requesting that UPenn respond to the document request by no later than February 7th. The committee is seeking a wide range of documents, including reports of anti-Semitic activity on campus since early 2021. It wants information on how UPenn responds to hate crimes, disciplinary actions against staff and students related to alleged targeting of Jews, documents and financial information linked to a Palestinian literature festival held on campus last year, and information on foreign donations, including donations from Qatar. In a letter to UPenn, Fox wrote, "We have grave concerns regarding the inadequacy of Penn's response to anti-Semitism on its campus. Fox also called out UPenn over the Palestine Rights Literature Festival. Fox wrote that the festival's director, Susan Abu Hawa, labeled Israelis human garbage and also allegedly said that she takes comfort in knowing that this colonial apartheid state will eventually be wiped off the map. Lawmakers launched a formal investigation into UPenn, Harvard University, and MIT last month, following disastrous testimony about anti-Semitism from the leaders of the three schools.
I am asking, specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
A UPenn spokesperson told CNN in a statement that the university has received the document request and will respond after they complete a review of it. Daniel Monahan, News.
The Federal Aviation Administration approving an inspection process that'll allow airlines to fly their Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes again. That's after all MAX 9 models were grounded following a scary Alaska Airlines incident where the side panel blew out mid-flight.
That's as the CEO of Boeing met behind closed doors with lawmakers on Capitol Hill yesterday as the company comes under intensified scrutiny.
Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes could soon be back in the air. The Federal Aviation Administration approved inspection criteria for the plane that would return it to service. But the agency also took aim at Boeing, saying the Alaska Airlines incident must never happen again. The FAA said Boeing can't expand production of MAX models until all quality control issues have been resolved. The agency gave no estimate of how long that limitation would last. Alaska Airlines CEO Ben Minicucci criticized Boeing in an interview with NBC News. He said the in-flight blowout should never have happened.
We found some loose bolts on many of our MAX 9s. So those, yeah. So those are things that are going to be rectified through the inspection process.
Meanwhile, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun met with senators on Capitol Hill yesterday. He's there to answer questions and assure lawmakers Boeing planes are safe.
We fly safe planes. We don't put airplanes in the air that we don't have 100% confidence in. I'm here today in a spirit of transparency to, number one, recognize
They were 100% in support of social distancing, face masks, vaccine mandates, contact tracing, lockdowns, censorship, the whole 9 yards of anybody who questioned the efficacy of any parts of this. The main problems they claim took place under COVID-19 were not those things. They're not saying, hey, the lockdowns were bad. They're not saying the face masks were bad. They're not saying, hey, it was terrible, children couldn't go to school, and people were being fired from their jobs for refusing to get the vaccines. The problem that they claim happened under COVID-19, in their eyes, were things like people refusing to comply, or people being able to spread information that challenged the narratives and caused things of what they call vaccine hesitancy. In other words, they're talking about threats of non-compliance with their totalitarian activities. That's what they say went wrong under COVID-19. And when they talk about fixing what went wrong, they're not talking about not abusing our basic rights. They're talking about forcing us to abide by all these policies they tried last time. But on the issue of so-called disease X and, what a future virus outbreak might look like, well, speaking of lab leaks, the Chinese Communist Party appears to be one step ahead of everyone on all of this. Because look at this, folks. Daily Mail, Chinese scientists have been experimenting with a mutant coronavirus strain that is 100% lethal in mice. Despite concerns such research could spark another pandemic. Scientists in Beijing, who are linked to the Chinese military, cloned a COVID-like virus found in pangolins known as GXP2V, and they used it to then infect mice. And guess what? These mice had been humanized. Remember when they were doing these other experiments, including the ones tied to Fauci and so on? They were working with
the lab in California.
Humanized lungs, which they use They included, for example, severed baby heads to create these humanized mice. And because they're using these humanized mice, according to Daily Mail, it says it means they were engineered to express a protein found in people with the goal of being able to assess how the virus might react in humans. And how did that react? Well, it says here, every rodent that was infected with the pathogen died within 8 days, which the researchers described as surprisingly quick. The team, it says also, they were surprised to find high levels of viral load in the mice's brain. So the virus, the COVID, multiplies and spreads through the body in a unique way. Writing in a scientific paper that has not yet been published, they wanted the finding to underscore, they said, a spillover risk of GXP2V into humans. In other words, the CCP, tied to its military, is working on new viruses which kill everything, at least with humanized mice, and they're worried now it could leak into the wild. Now, aside from the potential lab leak theory of a future, disease X pandemic, there's also the concern of origin, virus in them. The Guardian said that humanity is bizarre of war, in the earth, one day by Earth's warming, and unleash a major disease outbreak, they say. Strains of these microbes, or zombie viruses as they're known, have already been isolated by researchers who have raised fears that a new global medical emergency could be triggered not by an illness new to science, but by a disease from the distant past. Are you getting that, folks? They're saying global warming is going to melt the ice caps to release ancient deadly viruses that have been trapped in the ice for, millions of years. And so, in order to see what these threats are, they're digging them up and capturing them and bringing them to their virus labs. Meaning they're bypassing the whole theory of maybe the ice caps will melt and new viruses will all of us. They're digging them up. You getting that? It notes that as a result, scientists have begun planning an Arctic monitoring network that would pinpoint early cases of a disease caused by ancient microorganisms. Additionally, it would provide infected people in a bid to contain an outbreak and prevent infected people from leaving the region. I'd imagine look a lot like the movie The Thing, actually. Now, on the issue of the government response to a so-called disease X, though, and what the heck is happening with all this, the narratives of a potential pandemic are being used for other purposes. As they talk about the need for global surveillance and contact tracing and digital IDs and everything else, this is just and by word, not just talking about using these for health purposes. They're using the narrative of disease X as the Trojan horse to bring new systems of social into society. There's to create new systems of surveillance, social control, and systems for a global government with the World Health Organization power is full of entry on Earth. So what would these actually create? What's the actual agenda? Well, let me show you what they're saying. This is Dr. Meryl Nass explaining this to the European Parliament.
We're undergoing a soft, and the idea is to create a whole new set of laws and ignore the existing human rights laws and other laws under the pretext of pandemic preparedness and the biosecurity agenda. The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO Directorate in the United States in charge, a pandemic treaty and amendments to the existing international health regulations that will remove the human rights protections currently embedded in the IHRs, will enforce surveillance, censorship, get rid of freedom of speech, require governments to censor and only push a single narrative. Also, we will be subject, if they can make this work, to vaccines developed in 100 days, which the organization CEPI is planning to do. And one of the people who founded CEPI was Jeremy Farrar, who is now the chief scientist at the WHO, to bring this forward. Other things that the amendments do is to bind the states so they're no longer recommendations, but enforceable edicts. Provide a liability shield get rid of intellectual property rights, move supplies from one country to another, enforce digital passports, and the Director General of WHO can demand that a pandemic or a potential pandemic exists. He can just declare it with no standards, and then countries around the world will have to obey.
Now, look, the list of new systems and proposals would actually go on for a while, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. But look, these powers and new technologies that are on the table right now for global surveillance and social control, they're not even limited to the World Health Organization. We focused a lot on them. It goes beyond them. In fact, one of the big things right now is this biometric digital ID. Take, for example, what's being discussed at the World Economic Forum, just wrapped up, about biometric digital ID. This right here is Queen Maxima of the Netherlands speaking about it. Watch.
In order to open an account, you need to have an ID.
Right.
And I have to say that when I started this job, there were actually very little countries in Africa or Latin America that had one ubiquitous type of ID, and certainly that it was digital, and certainly that it was biometric. And we've really worked with all our partners to actually help that be, to grow this. And the interesting part of it is that, yes, it is very necessary for financial services, but not only. Sure. It's also good for school enrollment. It's also good for health, who will actually go to vaccination or not. It's very good to get your subsidies, from the government. So this has not only effect to the financial services. It's a very important issue.
Sure.
The digitalization has played, of course, a very important role.
Now, look, read between the lines, and here's what they're saying. They're using the narrative of a COVID-like outbreak, or just COVID-19, ushering in the system for digital IDs. And these digital IDs are being used for things like new tools to ensure people are following the vaccine mandates, including making sure children are getting their forced vaccinations. Now, how do you check whether a kid is vaccinated? How do you check whether we all get it? Well, it means you get these new health codes or whatever else that track different information on you. And remember, part of this is biometrics. Your